welcome to Food for Your Mind, episode 6. Today I'll be talking about the complete short stories of Flannery O'Connor and eating this spicy chicken sandwich. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm pleased to report that we've made it to, I believe, the halfway point in the Wendy's menu. This is my favorite item. This is my go-to usually. This is a pretty good one too. It's a little stiff, it can be a little bit juicier. I want that chicken to be kind of soft, not too chewy. I didn't get the fries today, but I'm gonna make it up with this beer here. I gotta remember to not make the squinty face when I drink though. I'm gonna try it again. Yeah, I think I'm actually gonna finish today. Alright, spicy chicken sandwich, great as always. I'm gonna give that a 9. Again, if the chicken had been just a little bit tenderer, then it would have been that perfect 10. Let's talk about one Flannery O'Connor, shall we? I want to start by mentioning that Esquire magazine, this was maybe 5 or so years ago, put out a list, excuse me, it was something like 50 books that every man should read or something like that. And there was a backlash because Flannery O'Connor was the only woman on the list of the books that men should be reading, implying that men don't need to be reading books by women, basically. This is pretty dumb for a couple of reasons. First of all, you don't need to be going to Esquire magazine to tell you which books to read. If you'd like information about which hat with a feather in it to wear this season, or perhaps the latest in prancing techniques, well, then maybe you should read GQ. If you want to read books, then read books. Secondly, if you're a man, or indeed even if you're a woman, you should be reading books by women. At least some. I know that there are a lot of guys out there who have probably never read a book by a woman, or at least not by choice. In fact, I used to be just such a guy, and if you had asked me back in those days to provide a rationale for why I didn't want to read books by women, I would have said something like, women are insulated from the harsh realities of life. And because of that, they do not sufficiently learn the truth about the human condition, and therefore they are not really fit to be writers. I think that that was likely true of the good-looking middle-class women that I was trying to have sex with and who would not have sex with me. But there are plenty of women out there who are, poor or hunchbacked or have any number of problems. And those women can indeed sometimes write books, and Flannery O'Connor wrote some. I wanted to make a third point about that GQ list, and then we'll move on. It is illustrative even in its errors, in that Flannery O'Connor is a writer who, despite the fact she is a woman, is pretty roundly liked by men, and seems to have kind of a male vibe. Flannery can be a man's name. And a lot of people have reported to me that when they first read Flannery O'Connor's writing, they assumed she was a man. What I think people are referring to when they refer to her writing as masculine is a lack of sentimentality. I'm not sure why exactly that would be considered manly. Charles Dickens is a man. He's perhaps the most sentimental of all writers. Now I'd like to talk about Flannery O'Connor's biography a bit. I'm going to focus on one specific facet of her life, the fact that she had lupus. If you don't know what lupus is an autoimmune disease in which the body begins to attack itself. And it can cause a wide range of symptoms, mostly inflammation related, but in poor Flannery O'Connor's case, this reduced her to walking around with those 2 arm canes for most of her life. And in short, she was a sexually unacceptable human, given her own race and class and place in society. She would apparently have a book salesman boyfriend, briefly, there's a lot of B's there. He kissed her one time, and I think was repulsed enough that he ran off and married another woman in Sweden. So it's difficult to say for sure, but Flannery O'Connor likely died a virgin. She probably never had sex her whole life. She died at about 40 or so from lupus, sadly. The title of this little lecture, I guess we'll say, is Flannery O'Connor, Volcel, or Incel. I, of course, clearly claim that she's Incel. She didn't want to have boyfriends, but just couldn't. There's a lot of people like that who would like to be with somebody, but for some reason they can't. You may not believe this out there on YouTube, but I myself even had some trouble in this department for a while. And I can definitely say that if something like this happens to you, if you can't find a sexual partner, especially because of what you look like for a shallow reason, for example, or because you don't have enough money or something like that, you can begin experiencing feelings of anger, feelings of disgust, feelings of sadness. The trick, of course, if you find yourself in this situation, is that you have to find something to replace that sexual life that you're failing to experience at the moment. The two big ones that a lot of people seem to turn to, first of all, there's mass murder, the incels. They can go that route. And a number of characters in Flannery O'Connor's fiction do go that route. There's also spirituality, or a noble goal, like, say, the arts or science. In Flannery O'Connor's case, she became very, very Catholic. She made her mother drive her to Mass back and forth every day. Catholics are not the only faith who has a celibate priesthood, but they're notable for that. And I think that's actually very important for Flannery. Basically, in my opinion, this was her way of recasting her own sexual failures as a type of saintliness. Flannery O'Connor's stories are always full of people who are trying to replace something with something else. It's a very, very common trope that crops up again and again and again. Typically, the characters in her fiction are trying to find a replacement for faith, and that replacement may be violence, it may be philosophy, it may be social conditioning. But I feel that this is in fact just one step removed from what is really going on, which is that Flannery O'Connor's faith is basically a replacement for her failed sexual life. There are a lot of good stories in this collection. I'm gonna name some of my favorites real quick. I will just recommend Enoch and the Gorilla. That's a bit of her novel Wise Blood, which is not included in the complete short stories, but it's also very good, very well worth reading. A Good Man is Hard to Find is her most famous short story, probably. That one's good too. I like The River. The Displaced Person is also good. Green Leaf is also good. You Can't Be Any Poorer Than Dead, I like. And there's also the one that I'm going to talk about today, my favorite, Good Country People. Now, I'm not going to read the whole story, but I can give you a little plot summary. This is a story of a young woman who, like Flannery O'Connor, suffers from a health condition. She has half her leg blown off below the knee. Half of one leg, at least, blown off below the knee. And this has similarly reduced her ability to compete in the world sexually, shall we say. She, despite her adulthood, still lives at home with her mother, just like Flannery O'Connor did throughout most of her life. Then one day, the lives of these people, this young woman and her mother, are invaded by an itinerant Bible salesman. And I'm just going to read some bits of the story, and you will see what happens as it develops. Before I even get started, I did just want to mention, obviously, the artificial leg is a replacement for her real leg. The young woman in the story is named Joy, though she has renamed herself Hulga because she likes the ugliness of this name. Again, it's a replacement name for her real name. Her mother's name is Mrs. Hopewell. Mrs. Hopewell, who had divorced her husband long ago, needed someone to walk over the fields with her, and when Joy had to be impressed for these services, her remarks were usually so ugly and her face so glum that Mrs. Hopewell would say, "If you can't come pleasantly, I don't want you at all." To which the girl, standing square and rigid-shouldered, with her neck thrust slightly forward, would reply, "If you want me, here I am, like I am." So again, you see the husband is gone, and Mrs. Hopewell needs a replacement for this husband. It goes on. This is Mrs. Hopewell kind of thinking to herself. She thought of her still as a child, because it tore her heart out to think instead of the poor stout girl in her 30s who had never danced a step or had any normal good times. Her name was really Joy, but as soon as she was 21 and away from home, she had had it legally changed. Mrs. Hopewell was certain that she had thought and thought until she had hit upon the ugliest name in any language. Then she had gone and had the beautiful name, Joy, changed without telling her mother until she had done it. Her legal name was Hulga. When Mrs. Hopewell thought the name Hulga, she thought of the broad, blank hull of a battleship. She would not use it. She continued to call her Joy, to which the girl responded, but in a purely mechanical way. Again, the replacing of things, replacing the name. These stories, often people, as I said, trying to replace faith with something else, like philosophy, for example. This young woman in her 30s, she was a philosophy major. Had her health not kept her at home, that's likely what she'd be doing, is off philosophizing somewhere. But here's a brief bit of a philosophical text that Mrs. Hopewell finds. One day, Mrs. Hopewell had picked up one of the books the girl had just put down, and opening it at random, she read, "Science, on the other hand, has to assert its soberness and seriousness afresh, and declare that it is concerned solely with what is. Nothing. How can it be for science anything but a horror and a phantasm? If science is right, then one thing stands firm. Science wishes to know nothing of nothing. Such is, after all, the strictly scientific approach to nothing. We know it by wishing to know nothing of nothing." These words had been underlined with a blue pencil, and they worked on Mrs. Hopewell like some evil incantation and gibberish. She shut the book quickly and went out of the room as if she were having a chill. We're going to skip forward a bit till this itinerant Bible salesman shows up, and things begin to get a little more interesting. Joy had given him one... The Bible salesman's been invited to dinner at this point. Joy had given him one look on being introduced to him, and then throughout the meal had not glanced at him again. He had addressed several remarks to her, which she had pretended not to hear. Mrs. Hopewell could not understand deliberate rudeness, although she lived with it, and she felt that she had always to overflow with hospitality to make up for Joy's lack of courtesy. She urged him to talk about himself, and he did. He said that he was the 7th child of 12, and that his father had been crushed under a tree when he himself was 8 years old. He had been crushed very badly, in fact, almost cut in two, and was practically not recognizable. His mother had got along the best she could by hard working, and she had always seen that her children went to Sunday school and that they read the Bible every evening. He was now 19 years old, and he had been selling Bibles for 4 months. In that time, he had sold 77 Bibles and had the promise of 2 more sales. He wanted to become a missionary because he thought that was the way you could do the most for people. "He who loses his life shall find it," he said simply, and he was so sincere, so genuine and earnest, that Mrs. Hopewell would not for the world have smiled. That's another little replacement. He who loses himself will find it. You lose something, so it's going away, but you're finding something new. So what you lost is being replaced. He goes away. Hulga and the Bible salesman have agreed to meet the next day, and this is her at night, thinking the situation over to herself. During the night, she had imagined that she seduced him. She imagined the two of them walking on the place until they came to the storage barn beyond the 2 back fields, and there she imagined that things came to such a pass that she very easily seduced him, and that then of course she had to reckon with his remorse. True genius can get an idea across even to an inferior mind. She imagined that she took his remorse in hand and changed it into a deeper understanding of life. She took all his shame away and turned it into something useful. Well, that's just what I was kind of saying, that if you're an incel, you're going to have to take the hurt and the pain that has caused you and do something with it. Eventually they meet, and at a certain point the Bible salesman says, "I want you to take off your wooden leg." The boy gave her a long, penetrating look because, he said, "it's what makes you different. You ain't like anybody else." She sat staring at him. There was nothing about her or her round, freezing blue eyes to indicate this had moved her, but she felt as if her heart had stopped and left her mind to pump her blood. She decided that for the first time in her life, she was face to face with real innocence. This boy, with an instinct that came from beyond wisdom, had touched the truth about her. When after a minute she said in a hoarse, high voice, "All right," it was like surrendering to him completely. It was like losing her own life and finding it again, miraculously, in his. Here you see, I love that line. I love that line. That's if you've ever been in love, that's what it's like. And also, again, you see it's a replacement. And it's a different kind of replacement because it's a replacement with the same. You're losing your life, but you're finding it again in his. So it's the same. It's almost the same thing, but not quite. It's hard to explain, I guess. Now we're gonna have a final quote. I'm not gonna quite reveal what happens at the end, but I just want to read this one One last thing, and then we'll quit. Wait, he said. He leaned the other way and pulled the valise toward him and opened it. It had a pale blue spotted lining, and there were only 2 Bibles in it. This is interesting. There are 2 Bibles in it. One we learn is fake, but the other one perhaps is real. He took out one of these and opened the cover of it. It was hollow and contained a pocket flask of whiskey, a pack of cards, and a small blue box with printing on it. He laid these out in front of her one at a time in an evenly spaced row, like one presenting offerings at the shrine of a goddess. He put the blue box in her hand. This product should be used only for the prevention of disease, she read, and dropped it. Again, I'll make a point I've made before. You see, you have the Bible, there's the words that are in the Bible, but yet they have been replaced by whiskey. Now, you see again, it's the way, it's the claim that Flannery O'Connor keeps making over and over again is that people who don't have faith have to replace it with something else, like whiskey, for example. But I think for Flannery, she just needed some bonage and never quite got it. But the upshot is, she wrote these great stories, so I'm going to give her a 9 out of 10. Come back next week for more food for your mind.